Hey guys, tonight we're taking a little trip. Somewhere hot. And I don't mean beach resort hot. I mean lose your eyebrows, sweat out your soul, sun god doesn't care about your plans kind of hot. Welcome to ancient Egypt, land of pyramids, pharaohs, and daily heat stroke. If you think summer is rough now, wait until you're trying to survive 110 degrees in a linen tunic with no AC and no concept of deodorant. Spoiler, you're going to sweat, and it's going to get weird. Before we dive into the sand-scorched nightmare, take a second to like the video and subscribe. Only if you're into history that keeps you humble and slightly dehydrated. Drop a comment below with where you're watching from and how hot it is outside right now. Bonus points if it's cooler than ancient Thebes in July. Probably is. Now dim the lights. Maybe put on a fan. Pretend it's the Nile breeze. Let your eyelids droop like a wilted lotus flower. Because tonight we're heading back, way back, to a time where beating the heat was a full-time job. And failure was mostly fatal. Congratulations, you've just woken up in ancient Egypt. The year is somewhere around 1300 BCE. The good news? You're alive. The bad news? The sun is already trying to murder you. You open your eyes and instantly regret it. Not because of what you see, but because the very act of seeing feels like dragging sandpaper across your retinas. That golden glow on the horizon isn't your morning blessing, it's your daily oppressor. Welcome to Ra's endless spotlight. You're lying on a reed mat in what could generously be called a home, but is more accurately described as a beige oven made of baked mud and passive-aggressive architecture. The walls are mud brick, cracked from last season's drought, and the ceiling is mostly just wishful thinking. There's no door, no windows, just an opening that lets in equal parts breeze, sand, and the occasional extremely judgmental cat. You're already sweating, but not the fun, post-workout kind of sweat. No. This is the ancient Egyptian version of a full-body despair leak. Your bed, if you're feeling optimistic, is a palm fibre mat layered with something that used to be straw, but now functions mostly as kindling. There's no mattress, no cushion, just an intimate relationship with the floor and a family of biting insects who have paid no rent and respect no boundaries. The mat sticks to your back like papyrus on wet clay. You try to roll over, but realise your limbs are already sore from sleeping on what is essentially a woven torture slab in a 98-degree room with no air circulation and one fly who refuses to leave your nostrils alone. You're not royalty. Sorry. You're not even middle class. You're what historians politely refer to as a labourer, which means everyone expects you to do everything, but no one will remember your name. You don't have a title. You have a problem, survival. You don't live near the pyramids. Those are for the dead. You live near a canal that smells like old fish and dying ambition. You have exactly one outfit, no shoes, and an unshakable sense that today is going to be worse than yesterday, and probably better than tomorrow. Your body is covered in a thin film of grime, oil, and existential dread. Bathing is a once-in-a-while event that involves a long walk, questionable water, and the risk of being bitten by something that hasn't been properly categorized by science yet. Your hair is stiff with sweat and dust. Your breath smells like onion and defeat. And you've just realized, with a growing sense of panic, that this is not a nightmare. This is life, and it's just getting started. The sounds of the village begin to seep in. A donkey brays like it's being haunted by its own choices. Children are already running barefoot through the sand, screaming with the kind of energy that only comes from malnutrition and generational trauma. Somewhere in the distance, a pot crashes, a woman curses, and someone starts singing what could be a hymn or just a really aggressive complaint. This is morning in ancient Egypt, subtle as a sandstorm, merciful as a tax collector, and you, poor thing, are expected to function. You sit up, sort of. Your back feels like someone buried a hot stone under your shoulder blades. Your knees crack like old papyrus scrolls being unrolled for the first time in a decade. You're 17 years old, which makes you practically a senior citizen. By this age, you've already survived 3 floods, 2 locust swarms, and the realization that gods are real, but none of them seem particularly interested in your well-being. The air is thick, not humid, just heavy. Heavy with heat, heavy with dust, heavy with all the things you wish you didn't have to do today. You cough once. It tastes like sand. Your mouth is dry, your tongue is dry, your soul is dry. There's no moisture. There's only heat. Oppressive, relentless, omnipresent heat. It doesn't gently rise like a summer day. It pounces, like a lion in linen. You glance toward the doorway and consider staying inside. But inside is a loose term in ancient Egypt. Your home isn't air-conditioned. It's barely shaded. It's just slightly less hot than the outside, which is not a comfort so much as a consolation prize. The sun is already climbing, and you can feel it, even from here, radiating through the mud brick walls like the breath of a divine furnace. And it's not even noon yet. You shuffle toward the opening, because doors aren't really a thing for you. Just a woven mat that flaps in the wind, and does absolutely nothing to keep the bugs out. The floor is a mix of packed dirt, sand, and old hopes. You step into the morning light and instantly feel like a roasted fig. Your shadow flickers weakly behind you, trying to escape back inside. But there's no escape. This is your climate, your kingdom of sweat. Your name doesn't matter. No one will carve it into stone. You won't be mummified or honoured with a tomb. You'll be lucky if someone remembers to stack a couple bricks over your corpse so the vultures don't get creative. You're a nobody. A sun-baked, salt-stained, semi-dehydrated human placeholder in one of the oldest civilizations on Earth. Your job? Stay alive long enough to regret being born here. And you're not alone. Your family sleeps in the same room, if they're not already up. Your little brother is chewing on something he found on the floor. Your aunt has started her daily ritual of complaining about the heat by yelling at the house goats. And your father is mumbling about the pharaoh again, as if his anger can influence anything other than your shared despair. You love them, of course, but not before sunrise, because in ancient Egypt, even love is exhausting before breakfast. You step outside, and immediately the heat slaps you. Not gently, not like a warm embrace. No, this is the full open palm force of the sun god Ra himself, delivering his daily message. You will suffer, and you will sweat. There's no breeze. The air doesn't move. It just hovers around you, like an angry ghost made of fire. The light is too bright to look at, but too everywhere to escape. You squint, already tearing up, not from emotion, but from sheer atmospheric hostility. Your tear ducts are doing their best, but even they are considering giving up for the season. The village is awake, but not exactly cheerful. No one is cheerful before the 5th hour. They're functional, kind of. Your neighbours are stumbling around, in various states of undress and frustration. One guy is trying to chase his goat with a ladle. Another is yelling at a cracked jar. A woman is already scolding her husband for breathing too loud. This is the community spirit. Everyone is tired, vaguely sunburned, and armed with sarcasm. And it's not even mid-morning yet. You start to walk toward the irrigation canal, because that's what passes for water access around here. The ground is hot. Not warm, hot. It's the kind of heat that cooks your soles through your bare feet. If you're lucky enough to own sandals, they're made of woven papyrus or stitched leather, which means they offer about as much protection as hope and a prayer. You walk anyway, not because you want to, because you have to. Because this is how survival works now. One reluctant step at a time toward a lukewarm puddle you hope hasn't been recently urinated in. By the time you reach the canal, you're sweating so much you could salt fish with your elbows. You kneel down, cup your hands, and splash your face. The water is thick. Not visibly, but you feel it. It's not refreshing. It's just marginally wetter than the air. But it's all you've got. You take a small sip, immediately question your decision, then take another. Your stomach makes a noise you don't interpret. Could be digestion. Could be the first warning signs of intestinal betrayal. Ancient Egyptian roulette. You glance at your reflection in the water. You look like someone who's been held hostage by the sun. Your skin is darker than it used to be, not from tanning, but from accumulation. Of dust, of oil, of time. Your hair is somewhere between natural and neglected, and your eyes have that 1,000-yard stare of someone who has seen one too many sandstorms and not nearly enough shade. But it's not about vanity here. No one's checking their jawline. No one's doing skincare. If your skin isn't cracked open by heat rash, you're already winning. If your lips haven't peeled off in strips of sunburned parchment, you're living the dream. Beauty here is measured in how little you're bleeding, and whether you smell more like onions or less like despair. The only reason you bathe is because the smell becomes unbearable even to you. There's no soap, just sand, water, and friction. Sometimes someone figures out how to make a crude lye-based paste, but that's a luxury reserved for special occasions, like weddings, or funerals, or when you've been asked to stop offending the gods with your presence. As you stand back up, your back cracks again, and you remember, once more, that you are not built for this. No one is. Not really. You're just surviving. And everyone around you is doing the same. You pass by an old man fanning himself with a broken palm frond. He's been sitting on the same rock for 15 years, muttering about the Nile's moods like it's a jealous girlfriend. No one questions him, mostly because he's right. The Nile is moody, and it's ruined more weddings than locusts. You walk back toward your house, and the sun follows you like an angry debt collector. There's no escaping it, no clouds, no shade, just endless, relentless brightness. People wear linen because it's light, breathable, and it gives you the illusion that you're not melting. But linen doesn't protect you from everything, especially not from sweat, or dust, or judgmental glances from people who think you should be up earlier, and your tunic is soaked through by the time you sit down again. And let's talk about that tunic. You've had it for 3 years. It used to be white. Now it's somewhere between khaki and regret. It's patched in places where the seams gave up, and it smells faintly of vinegar and disappointment. You wash it when you can, but usually that means slapping it against a rock and pretending the stains aren't part of your personality now. You own exactly one other piece of clothing, a headscarf. It keeps the sun off your skull, sort of. unless the wind picks up, then it flies off like it's trying to escape your lifestyle. Back inside, your family is getting ready for the day, which mostly involves arguing about who drank the last of the date beer and who forgot to relight the oil lamp last night. Your grandmother is already grinding grain with the intensity of someone working through trauma. Your mother is braiding her hair with her eyes closed. Your uncle is trying to remember if he sold the goat yesterday or hallucinated it. And no one, not a single person, looks rested. Because sleeping through Egyptian heat is like trying to nap inside a kiln. You lie back on the mat for a moment, trying to catch your breath. Not because you're unfit, but because the very act of existing in this climate costs energy. The heat clings to your body like wet linen. The walls radiate stored sunlight like passive-aggressive radiators. Every breath you take is hot, shallow, and vaguely flavoured like yesterday's onions. And you haven't even started your day yet. You think about the pharaoh, not the god king part, but the actual guy. The man at the top. The one who gets carried around on a gold chair while people feed him figs and fan him with feathers. You wonder what that feels like, to have shade on demand, to eat cold things, to smell like something other than goat. But you'll never know. You weren't born into that tier. You're firmly in the beetle sweeper and clay hauler category of society. And yet, for reasons you can't fully explain, you still feel a strange sense of loyalty to this land. Maybe it's the Nile. Maybe it's the gods. Maybe it's heat stroke. But something about this brutal, beautiful place gets under your skin. Sometimes literally in the form of sand fleas. You belong here. You don't like it, but you belong. Like a cactus. Or a warning sign. You hear a shout from the next hut. Someone's collapsed already. It's not even the 6th hour. You know the drill. Carry them into the shade, fan their face, pour tepid canal water on their forehead, and hope they recover before the priest shows up to ask about last rites. It happens. Not every day, but often enough that no one panics. Just another victim of the unforgiving sun and questionable hydration practices. You sigh, wipe your face. It doesn't help. You're already soaked again. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where you don't wake up. You simply begin enduring. You sit still for a moment, not because you're calm, but because motion feels like an insult to your own survival. The very idea of moving your limbs, of walking into that daylight again, seems like something only a reckless person would attempt. Your body isn't rested, it's just paused. Like it shut down overnight, waiting for a reason to keep going. That reason never really comes. You just start moving again because that's what everyone else does. Your hands look older than they are. The sun has baked lines into them. The kind of creases that don't come from time, but from climate. You have calluses from work you don't remember doing, and scars from tools that probably weren't sharp enough to justify the damage they caused. Your fingernails are lined with dust. They always are. There's no escaping it. Dust in your hair. Dust in your food. Dust in your dreams. You've inhaled so much of it by now that if someone shook you, you'd leave behind a small historic cloud. You glance down at your legs. They're lean, sun-darkened, and scratched from the reeds by the canal. You've walked miles barefoot through sand that seems determined to remember your pain. Sometimes you wrap your feet in linen. Sometimes you don't bother. Blisters form. They break. They become part of your feet. You don't even notice anymore. But you notice your first. Always. That subtle, aching pull behind your throat. The way your mouth seems to dry out even while you're drinking. The water you drink isn't clear. It's not cold. It's just there. Sometimes you sip and feel it hit your stomach like a rock. Other times you drink and wonder if the thing crawling across your tongue was just a bit of leaf or something alive. But you drink it anyway. Because heat doesn't care about your dignity. It strips it from you like wind peeling bark from a tree. You don't remember a time before the heat. You've heard stories. Maybe once, when you were a child, someone told you about a strange rainstorm that lasted more than a few minutes. People danced. Crops drank deeply. But that's myth to you now. Your rain, when it comes, is a sputter. A grey smear on the horizon that leaves behind more steam than relief. The heat isn't a season here. It's the default setting. The world was born hot, it lives hot. And it will die hot. Maybe that's why your gods are also demanding. They're cranky, overheated, like the rest of you. You sometimes think about your ancestors, the ones whose names are still chiselled into the temple walls, the ones buried in tombs with gold masks and jars full of organs. You wonder if they felt the same sun, if they had the same dry cough that sneaks up in the night. If they too lay awake listening to the scratching of beetles in the walls and wondering if the stars were just holes in the sky letting the afterlife peek through. But then you remember, your name isn't written anywhere. It might never be. You won't be buried with treasures. You'll be buried in sand and silence. Your possessions, a dull blade, a cracked bowl, maybe a wooden charm, will be passed to someone else, or lost to the dust. Your story? It'll vanish with your breath. And yet, here you are, alive, breathing in the burnt air of the Nile Valley and thinking thoughts no one will ever hear. Not profound thoughts, just practical ones. Like, when was the last time the food jar was sealed? Is that sound outside the goat again, or something worse? Did you dream that someone stole your mat, or did your brother actually do it? The small mysteries of surviving, the kind that never get inscribed into monuments, but make up the rhythm of your life. You get up again, slower this time. You're trying not to let your knees make that sound again, the one that makes your uncle flinch, because it reminds him of his own mortality. You stretch your arms and feel your shoulder pop like an overripe fig. You wince, not because it hurts, but because that's just how your body greets the morning now, with sound effects and implied threats. You duck under the low doorway of your hut, though calling it a doorway feels generous. It's more like a polite hole. You nod at your neighbour. She nods back. No words, no greetings, just shared heat and mutual understanding. She's already balancing a jug of water on her head, her face locked in that expressionless mask people wear when they've been up since before the gods bothered to start the sun. You pass by the village priest, who's already sweating through his ceremonial linen. He gives you a look that might be a blessing, or might be gas. You nod, again. Everyone nods here. It's too hot for full conversations. Emotions are conserved. You save your smiles for the shade. Even the animals look tired. The goats shuffle like commuters, late to a job they hate. The donkeys stand in the few remaining patches of shadow, their ears twitching like they're trying to wave the sun away. A dog pants in the dust, tongue dry, eyes half-lidded in eternal resignation. You envy it. At least it doesn't have to report to a supervisor. The Nile, off in the distance, glistens like it wants to be helpful. But you know better. It's beautiful, yes, but it's also moody. Too much water? Flood? Not enough? Famine? Just enough? Still not great, because now you're hauling buckets under a sun that actively wants you dead. The Nile doesn't care. It just flows. Indifferent and eternal. Like time, like heat. Like the silent judgment of every person who died from sunstroke, and now watches you from the underworld with faint amusement. You remember something your grandfather used to say right before he collapsed during harvest. The gods love the heat. It brings you closer to them. Maybe. Or maybe they just enjoy watching the slow roast of civilization. Maybe being divine means having the power to control the weather and deciding, nah, let's keep the oven on. You catch a glimpse of yourself in a shard of polished bronze someone left near a stall. Your face is not your own. It's a face that's been borrowed by the sun and left out too long. A map of freckles, tan lines, burns and peeling places. Your eyes squint without trying. Your lips are dry even when wet. Your expression is somewhere between annoyed and amazed that you've made it this far. And still, you carry on. Because what else is there to do? You could sit in the shade, but there's work to be done. Always. Water to haul, grain to grind, walls to repair. If you stop for too long, someone will ask you why, and you won't have a good answer. Because rest is a concept reserved for cats and corpses. You start walking again. Slow, sure steps through the scorched dust, your sandals dragging slightly. The sky above is white hot and endless. The village hums with the low sound of collective resistance. Every footstep, every gesture, every sigh is an act of rebellion against the tyranny of the sun. And in this moment, as your back begins to sweat for the third time since sunrise, as your neck itches under your head wrap, as the sand gets into parts of you that you're sure were never meant to be sandy, one thing becomes clear. You don't live in Egypt. You survive it. Welcome to your world. Or at least, the piece of it the Nile hasn't swallowed yet. You live in a house made of mud. Not metaphorically, literally. Baked mud bricks, stacked by hand, sun-dried until they have turned the same colour as your skin and aspirations. There's no plaster, no insulation, just earth baked into geometry and desperation. You think of it as a home. The sun thinks of it as a slow cooker. During the day, the walls trap heat like a tomb. At night, they release it back into the air in long, suffocating sighs, as if your very dwelling resents being lived in. There's one room, sometimes two, if your family is lucky or recently murdered someone with a spare annex. But mostly it's one box for everything. Sleeping, eating, storage, arguing, childbirth, and dying, all performed in the same tight space, often simultaneously. Furniture is minimal. A few reed mats, a low table, maybe a storage chest that doubles as a seat, a crib, and a stage for your aunt's nightly complaints. The walls are decorated with smoke stains, insect trails, and cracks wide enough to fit a small snake. You once found a lizard living in the corner. Your brother named it and tried to feed it dried lentils. It bit him and left. No one blamed it. Your ceiling is thatch and clay, if you're rich in time and poor in logic. It leaks when it rains, which, thankfully, isn't often. But when it does, it leaks in concentrated betrayal. Straight onto your face, or your food, or the one blanket your family owns, which absorbs moisture like a sponge and releases it with all the speed of geological erosion. Your door is a reed mat, frayed and pitiful, hanging from a loop of string. It doesn't keep anything out. It doesn't even pretend to. It swings lazily in the wind, letting in sunlight, bugs, rumours, and your neighbour's breathy arguments. You hear everything. The village is a bowl of noise. Babies crying, animals braying, people yelling across distances so short they could just walk, but no one walks if they can shout. That would be effort. And effort leads to sweat. And sweat, well, you're already drowning in it. Privacy doesn't exist. It's not a concept here. If you need to relieve yourself, you do so near the canal, behind a half-hearted barrier of reeds that's about as discreet as a sneeze in a temple. The dirt is hard, the air is thick, and the only thing shielding you from public shame is other people's indifference. You don't have a toilet, you have a spot. Claimed through tradition and habit, and the unspoken understanding that if someone's already squatting there, you go find a different bush. You wipe with whatever's nearby. Dry grass, a smooth stone, or sometimes nothing at all. If you're lucky, a scrap of linen, reused of course. Washed? In theory. Judged? Always. Bathing, as we've discussed, is an aspiration more than a routine. The Nile is there, but so are crocodiles, and the occasional decomposing offering. You bathe upstream, drink downstream, and hope the distinction holds. Sometimes it doesn't. Parasites aren't picky. They enter through your mouth, your skin, your eyes. You get used to it, or you die. Either way, the system sorts itself out. Let's talk temperature. In the shade, what little exists, the heat is manageable. Barely. But step into direct sunlight, and it's as if the gods themselves are pressing down on you with a molten hand. The air is dry, but not kind. It doesn't caress. It scorches. Your sweat doesn't cool you. It evaporates instantly, leaving behind a crust of salt that turns your skin into a map of all your regrets. Shade is currency. The most valuable resource in the village isn't gold or grain. It's a corner of shadow. A space behind a wall, under an awning, beside a large person who hasn't moved in an hour. You guard it jealously. You share it reluctantly. You abandon it never. And at night, you might think the heat would ease, that the sky would sigh, the earth would exhale, and you'd be able to sleep without feeling like a stuffed pigeon roasting on a spit. You would be wrong. The heat lingers. Trapped in bricks, in thatch, in your bones. It rises from the ground like a ghost who died in August and is still angry about it. You lie awake, sticky and half-sane, listening to insects whisper cruel things in your ears. Mosquitoes, gnats, fleas, they all love you. Not because you're sweet, because you're slow, exposed, and easy to pierce. You scratch until you bleed, then scratch the scabs, then bleed again. It's a cycle, a rhythm, a kind of intimate dance between you and the winged demons of the Nile Basin. And your house isn't sealed. Gaps in the walls invite everything: scorpions, spiders, dust devils, and sometimes, if you're truly blessed, a snake who decided your sleeping mat looked emotionally vulnerable. You don't scream. Screaming wastes water. You just pray, nudge it with a stick, and hope your ancestors are watching. But let's not forget the sand. It is everywhere. In your food, in your clothes, in your bed, in your teeth, in places you haven't seen since you were born. Sand is the background radiation of your existence. It scratches your skin, blinds your eyes, and infiltrates every surface. You once tried to sweep it out of the house. The wind laughed at you and delivered it back in larger quantities. You now accept it. You live with it. You name the dunes that pile in the corners. That one by the door? That's Cousin Hill. He's here to stay. And then there's the smell. Your world doesn't smell clean. It smells lived in, fermented, rich with biological honesty. People, animals, waste, sweat, fish, more sweat, rotting reeds, garlic breath, and whatever your neighbour's cooking that always somehow smells like regret and crushed dreams. You get used to it. Kind of. Occasionally someone walks by who smells different and you wonder if they're dead or just visiting from a wealthier district. You keep a jar of natron near your mat, not for cooking, for everything. It dries, preserves, disinfects and stings like the gods themselves when you get it in a cut. Some people brush their teeth with it. Others use it on wounds. You use it to pretend you're doing hygiene. Either way, it leaves behind a chalky film that tastes like someone punched you with salt. Let's revisit the architecture of your despair. The houses are close, too close. You can hear your neighbours breathe. You can smell their food. You can feel their disappointment wafting through the walls like incense of sadness. The alleys are narrow, shaded sometimes, flooded often. You walk through them sideways, bumping into things and pretending the slime underfoot isn't biological. When it rains, which is rare but always theatrical, the alleys become rivers of confusion. Mudslides, spilled chamber pots, dead frogs, children slipping and screaming in delighted horror. Then it dries, the stench stays, life goes on. You don't have a kitchen, you have a hearth, a flat stone, a pot, maybe a basket or two. Everything else is hope and improvisation. You cook with what you have: grains, onions, garlic, pulses, some dried fish that may or may not have expired last week. You don't have a spice rack. You have a pile of ash and the faint memory of what coriander used to taste like. If you find honey, it's like discovering joy in edible form. You use it sparingly, like a secret, like a sin. You store things in jars, sealed with wax or clay, or the firm belief that rats don't have thumbs. They do. Sort of. Enough to get in. Your grain is always at risk. You don't eat as much as you plan. You eat what survives the night, what doesn't mould, what doesn't crawl. And through it all, the heat, the stench, the insects, the claustrophobia, you continue, not joyfully, not easily, but steadily. Because this isn't a life built for comfort. It's built for endurance. For staying alive long enough to bury your parents, raise your children, and maybe, if you're lucky, see a year without famine or flooding or both. The gods don't offer air conditioning. They offer strength. The kind of strength that isn't loud or proud. The kind that gets up before dawn, scrapes a pot clean with a stick, and finds the energy to braid a child's hair while sweating through a linen tunic that hasn't been properly washed since the last lunar festival. This is your environment, your world, your open-air sauna of fate, and tomorrow it'll be hotter. Let's talk about the sun. Not metaphorically, not poetically, just honestly. The sun is your landlord, your tyrant, your morning alarm, and your executioner, wrapped into one giant glowing sphere that never takes a sick day. In ancient Egypt, the sun doesn't rise, it attacks. Slowly, methodically, and with unwavering commitment. Every morning it lifts itself over the edge of the eastern hills like a flaming god who's just remembered he owns the place. And from that moment on, you're on borrowed time. Time before dehydration. Time before your skin starts to feel like it's been salted and slow roasted. Time before you look at the one cloud on the horizon and start bargaining with imaginary weather spirits. Your world doesn't have seasons in the way modern people understand them. You don't talk about spring and fall like categories in a lifestyle magazine. You don't comment on how the air's getting crisp. No one's knitting scarves. No one's excited for soup season. Instead you get 3 modes: hot, too hot, and dead crops again. Each one lasts a few unbearable months and ruins different parts of your life. There's the season of inundation, where the Nile floods everything in a gooey baptism of hope and bacteria. Then the growing season, when your entire existence revolves around not starving. And finally, the harvest season, which is just code for get up earlier, sweat more, and try not to die with a sickle in your hand. Rinse and repeat, except don't rinse, because water is complicated and your bathing ration is about as generous as a landlord during a drought. The sun itself, Re, Ra, Atom, call him what you want, he rules over all. You are taught to respect him, pray to him, fear him, thank him. But also, if he were just slightly less dramatic, you'd be thrilled. Every surface reflects his glare. The walls of your home, the sand under your feet, even the pale reeds by the canal. They all bounce his light back at you like tiny mirrors forged from pure malice. At midday, you don't walk. You shuffle, slowly, carefully. Like the ground is made of fire and betrayal, your tunic clings to your back. Your shoulders burn, even when you cover them. Your scalp itches under your headscarf, but removing it is not an option unless you're trying to audition for a role as heat stroke victim number 4 in the village drama of survival. Shade, again, is more than a physical concept. It's a political one. If you claim a shadow cast by someone else's house, you're entering a silent negotiation. You stand just so, careful not to block their breeze, careful not to attract flies that might redirect themselves onto their porch. It's a dance. A tense, sweaty ballet of mutual overheating. And the Nile, oh, the Nile. She is both goddess and gossip, saviour and saboteur. She giveth, then she absolutely taketh away, and usually not in the order you'd prefer. When she floods, it's a spectacle. Not the pretty, Instagrammable kind. The loud, stinking, panic-inducing kind. Water swallows fields. Mud rises like it's trying to retake the land. The air smells like wet compost and regret. You run to higher ground, if there is any. You lash baskets shut. You move goats. You pray. Then when the waters recede, you rush back to see what's left. Sometimes the flood leaves behind silt and miracles. Sometimes it leaves behind rot and sorrow. You never know. When the Nile behaves, she's generous. Fish. Silt. Coolness? A place to escape the heat, if only for a moment. But when she's angry, she turns into a snatching serpent. She'll drag a child off the bank, twist an oxen's leg into a broken puzzle, or carry away your hard-earned grain like a spoiled offering. You respect her the same way you respect a cobra in your bed. Lovingly, fearfully, at a distance. Speaking of cobras, let's talk about the other inhabitants of your glorious natural world. Scorpions, big ones, little ones. Black, gold, and sand-coloured ones that you can't see until your toe finds them. They live in your walls, in your blankets, sometimes in your shoes. You shake out everything you wear, every single time. Even then, you're not safe. One sting, and if you're lucky, it's just pain and swelling. If you're not, well, the priest will start carving your name onto a prayer stick by dinner. There are also snakes, not the cartoon kind, not the sleek, exotic, noble beasts from temple murals. No, these ones are confused, angry, and extremely venomous. They slither through your thatch roof. They sleep under your mats. Sometimes they make eye contact in the outhouse, and then disappear back into a crack like a cursed riddle you never asked for. And then there are the bugs. Oh, the bugs. Beetles that click and crunch under your feet. Mosquitoes so bold they land on your eyelids, Lice so persistent they feel like co-workers. Flies that hover like judgmental gods, inspecting every meal, every wound, every expression. You once tried to swap one with a palm frond and accidentally knocked over your food. The fly stayed, your dinner didn't. Your ears are never truly quiet. There is always something buzzing, scratching, chirping, or crawling. You don't sleep in silence. You sleep to the music of legs and wings and hunger. And let's not forget the locusts. When they come, and they do, they come as a whisper that turns into a scream. One moment the sky is blue. The next, it is movement. A living cloud of legs and teeth and destruction. They chew everything. Leaves, bark, hope. You run outside, flailing, banging pots, yelling into the chaos, trying to protect your half-dead vegetables and your half-dying spirit. It doesn't work. They eat and they leave, and you pick up the pieces. You're not at the top of the food chain here. You are food, or furniture, or just a temporary inconvenience for the creatures that really run the place. The Nile crocs, they don't care who you are. Rich, poor, priest, peasant, fall in and you're a snack. Hippos, they look cute in paintings. In person, they are nightmares with teeth. They'll flip your boat just because they can. You've seen it, you don't talk about it. The man who went overboard was never seen again, and everyone just collectively decided he angered the gods and left it at that. You don't go out at night, either. Not unless you're willing to wrestle with jackals or trip over a crocodile looking for an evening stroll. The darkness in Egypt isn't peaceful. It's full of heat that hasn't cooled, animals that haven't eaten, and spirits that haven't moved on. You walk quickly, stay close to torches, and never, never say anything sarcastic about the gods after sunset. And through all this, through the scorching days and haunted nights, you survive. Not by strength, not by wisdom, but by routine. You know which rocks stay cool the longest. You know which tree still has shade at noon. You know when the Nile smells wrong, and when the wind carries sand with teeth in it. You don't question these things. You respond. Like an animal. Like a veteran. Like someone who's already been reincarnated once and asked to be returned as a turnip. This is your existence. A fragile thread stretched across sun, sand, beasts and water. Tomorrow will be the same. Unless, of course, it's worse. Survival in ancient Egypt isn't about winning. It's about negotiating terms with the inevitable. You don't outsmart the climate. You don't dominate the land. You plead with it. You work around it. You hope it doesn't notice you today. Start with your house again. People eventually learn to build smarter. The best homes, if you could afford the labour, had thick mud brick walls, small high windows, and whitewashed surfaces to reflect the sun. Flat roofs let you sleep outside at night if you weren't afraid of insects, jackals, or the existential realization that stars don't care about you. But for most people, the walls are too thin, the roof sags, and the whitewash flaked off 3 floods ago. So you keep patching, rebuilding, sweating through your improvements. You sleep outside sometimes, not for fun, but for oxygen. The inside of your home is an oven by midnight. You lie on the roof with your eyes open, staring at the sky, counting meteors and misfortunes. The breeze sometimes visits, but mostly you just trade one form of discomfort for another. Less heat, more bugs. Less suffocation, more exposure. There's no right answer. Only consequences. Your clothes are designed to surrender. Linen, light, breathable, and rapidly soaked with sweat, is the fabric of the sun-beaten. You wear a single tunic, simple and shapeless, often tied with a belt that used to belong to your uncle, or maybe a goat. Men go shirtless when they can. Women wear long dresses when modesty is expected, and short wraps when labour demands it. Children wear nothing at all until society decides they've suffered enough to earn fabric. The linen isn't washed often. Water's too precious. Soap is too scarce. So you live in your own salt, staining every surface, sitting in the quiet company of people who also smell like heat and onions. You don't notice the smell anymore. It's part of your reality, like gravity or poverty. Sandals are for the lucky. Most people go barefoot, developing soles like tanned leather and toes like abstract sculpture. Cuts, blisters, infections, they all happen. You treat them with spit, natron, or a mixture of herbs and whispered hope. If that doesn't work, you limp until the gods get bored and let you recover. You wrap your head in linen to avoid sunstroke. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the sun finds you anyway. You faint. Collapse. Stare at the sky, from the ground, blinking through heat haze while someone throws water on your face and mutters about bad omens. There are no thermometers, no electrolytes, no cool washcloths. If your skin starts to boil and your vision goes dark, you either crawl to shade or die in the light. Ancient medicine called it a turning of the sun in the blood. Modern language calls it a medical emergency. Back then, it was just Tuesday. You build habits around survival. You fetch water early in the morning, before the sun's fully angry. You nap during the high sun, pretending it's about faith and not just avoidance. You eat sparingly, because heavy food in this heat is basically self-punishment. You cook late, clean less, and never ever make sudden movements at midday. The animals have figured it out better than you. Goats lie flat against the ground, becoming one with the dust. Cats disappear into shadows and emerge only to steal food or judge your choices. Even insects seem to know how to vanish in the heat and return only when it's socially unacceptable. You've tried rituals. Everyone has. Offerings to Ra at dawn, prayers to Happy, the Nile god, whispered while washing your hands. Incense burned to keep away bad air and worse spirits. Little charms tied around your wrist to ward off fire sickness, which is just what they call fevers when they don't know why you're shaking. People mark doorways with symbols to keep out plagues, curses and mosquitoes. No one knows if it works. But belief is cheaper than ointment. There are entire festivals designed around the environment, not to celebrate it, but to beg it to behave. There's the opening of the year, when the Nile floods and everyone pretends to be excited. You wade into the muck, toss flowers, chant old hymns, and hope your offerings don't float back upstream. There's the Feast of the Valley, where people pretend that death is peaceful and shade is symbolic, not just life-saving. And there are countless smaller traditions: washing statues, anointing tombs, circling trees 3 times to break a drought. Anything, everything. Because if the gods are watching, you want to look busy. You've even seen people walk backward into the river. Not for bathing, not for fishing, but because they believe the sun respects confusion. They mumble prayers while holding their breath, then emerge shivering and bitten by unseen things, but spiritually renewed. You're not sure it works, but they always look smug after. Your ancestors painted scenes of paradise in their tombs, gardens, water channels, cool shade under fig trees. Not because they lived that way, because they didn't. Their heaven was just a version of Earth, where no one ever had to wipe sweat off their eyelids again. You've seen those tombs, helped build them even, and every time you carry another block under the scorching gaze of Rye, you think, if paradise is just less hot, I'll take it. The elite have tricks, of course. The rich live in houses with courtyards, shaded walkways, servants to fan them. They store food in jars buried underground, where it's only slightly spoiled instead of actively fermenting. They pour water on floors to cool them, a luxury when most people drink water that's already been warmed by the sun and flavoured by algae. Some nobles sleep with wet cloths over their faces. Others bathe twice a day, twice, while servants scrub their backs and perfume their feet. You've seen it once, from a distance. You weren't allowed inside, but you smelled the frankincense drifting through the window, and briefly imagined what it would feel like to lie in water that didn't itch afterward. You never will. You've heard of inventions, hand fans, pulled by strings, rotating water wheels, stone-lined cool rooms in temple cellars. But they're all for people whose names are written in gold. Your name, if it's written at all, will be scratched on a potsherd. Maybe buried. Probably reused. Still you adapt. You build thicker walls. You cover windows with cloth soaked in Nile water. You dig holes in the floor to sleep closer to cool earth. You store your food in jars wrapped in damp linen, hoping the evaporative magic works just this once. Sometimes it does. Most of the time, you just lie and chew and hope the strange taste isn't mould. And yet somehow, through all this, people still live. They marry, laugh, make jokes about goats and sunburns. Children chase each other through alleys, yelling about crocodiles in the canal. Elders sit in whatever shade they can find, and complain about how the sun was different in their day. Worse, of course. Always worse. Your environment isn't just something you live in. It's something you carry. On your skin, in your lungs, behind your eyes. The sun has branded you. The Nile has moulded you. The sand has polished every corner of your body into something hard, tired, and entirely unwilling to give up. And that's what existence means here. You don't overcome nature. You just learn to live slightly slower than it wants to kill you. Let's be clear right up front. In ancient Egypt, you don't have a job. You are the job. Your entire body, from sun-damaged scalp to split, calloused toes, is a biological tool designed to turn someone else's prosperity into your suffering. There are no careers, no promotions, no weekends, just the endless cycle of sun-up to sundown effort, with a generous reward of not starving, maybe. Your workday starts when the light says so. Not when you feel ready. Not when you've had your third cup of barley beer and stared thoughtfully at the horizon. No. The sun peeks over the hills, and your name is already on the list. Your joints creak, your eyes sting, and you swing your legs over the edge of your mat like someone surrendering to gravity one limb at a time. You dress, if you aren't already in the same thing you slept in, because it's the only thing you own. Then you shuffle out into the already warming world, where your labour is not only expected, but required. You don't report to a boss. You report to the system. And the system wants you tired, sunburned, and productive. So what do? Whatever they tell you. Whatever needs doing. Whatever hurts. You could be a farmer, a builder, a fisher, a scribe's assistant, a potter's apprentice, or just a pair of arms someone noticed, loitering near the granary. If you're strong, you dig. If you're agile, you climb. If you're unlucky, you do both, while holding something fragile and irreplaceable. If you work the fields, your day is long, loud, and filled with sharp tools and bad posture. The tools themselves are wooden, with blades of bronze or stone that haven't been sharpened since the last dynasty. The soil is clay thick or rock hard, depending on the mood of the Nile. You spend hours bent at the waist, pulling weeds, planting barley, chasing off goats, and dodging the judgmental glares of ibis birds who seem to think you're doing it wrong. You work barefoot, always. Your feet are your boots, your shovel, your brakes. You walk through mud that smells like old fish and anger, through thorny scrub that doesn't bend, through fields filled with biting flies and ankle-deep regrets. If you're lucky, the sun is hidden by clouds for a few minutes. If not, you sweat so much your sweat starts to sweat. Water breaks? No. You sip when you can, from a clay jar you carried with you, filled with lukewarm water that tastes faintly of reeds and yesterday's effort. You ration it like trust. You do not share. Not unless you want to start a blood feud over hydration. If you're a woman, your job is both more and less. Less recognised, more relentless. You work the fields too. Of course you do. But you also manage the household, tend to children, grind grain, fetch water, make food, clean, repair, scold, soothe, organise, and pretend your life isn't slowly crumbling beneath a pile of daily tasks no one will ever thank you for. You grind flour using 2 stones, kneeling for hours, shoulders aching, arms trembling. You pound onions into paste. You mix spear mash with bare hands in open pots that may or may not have been previously occupied by beetles. You stir stew that smells like something expired, then serve it with a smile that's 40% hospitality and 60% muscle fatigue. And you do it all in the heat. The kind of heat that turns sweat into steam, that makes the inside of your skull feel like a kettle. You tuck your tunic between your legs, wipe your face on your own sleeve, and carry on. Because no one else will. And if you stop, the work multiplies. It waits for you, patient and cruel. Children work too. Of course they do. By the time you're 6, you're no longer adorable. You're a labour resource with legs. You feed animals, chase birds off the crops, carry buckets, sweep floors, deliver messages, run errands, cry quietly so you don't disrupt the adults. Childhood isn't a phase. It's a probationary period before full-time toil. And the elderly, they work until they don't. Which usually means they've died or fallen down too many times to be considered useful. Even then, they're asked to watch children, mend clothes, and yell at goats. The idea of retirement exists only as a joke, usually followed by coughing and more work. But let's say you're not a farmer. Let's say you've been chosen, a word that sounds better than dragged, to help build something. A wall, a road, a temple, or, God's help you, a pyramid. Congratulations. You're now a cog in the Pharaoh's divine construction machine. And by cog, we mean expendable muscle wrapped in linen and blister cream. You lift stones, heavy ones. You roll them across logs, push them up ramps, drag them across miles of ungrateful earth. You build in the heat. You bleed in the dust. You're shouted at by overseers who carry sticks, not because they're symbolic, but because they hit people. People like you. You're paid in rations. Bread, beer, onions. Sometimes fish. If you're on a royal project, you might even get salt or dried figs. But mostly, you're paid in survival. If you collapse, someone steps over you. If you drop something important, you're blamed. If you complain, you're ignored or punished if the scribe is having a bad week. You work with no gloves, no boots, No safety harness. You inhale dust for 8 hours, then spit blood and keep going. You're told your work is sacred, that you're helping build eternity. But eternity smells a lot like donkey sweat and dehydration. You think about quitting. Everyone does, but there's nowhere to go. The next village needs labourers too. The next job has the same sun, the same tools, the same low-level threat of heat stroke. So you stay, because the work never ends. Only people do? Work in ancient Egypt doesn't simply take your time, it takes your body. And it doesn't even ask politely. You don't have workers' rights, you don't have a union. You don't even have the right to say, "I'm tired," out loud, unless you're ready for a visit from the village overseer and his gently threatening stick. You have injuries. You have blisters that rip open like overripe dates. You have cuts on your feet, bruises on your ribs, and a back that's more question mark than spine. But no one is tracking these things. There is no official injury report when a stone block crushes your foot. There's just a quiet moment, some cursing, and then a decision. Limp through it or get replaced. And you can be replaced. Always. You're not a person with a unique skill set. You're a warm, semi-functioning organism that can lift things and obey directions. If you can't do that, someone else will. Maybe your cousin, maybe your neighbour. Maybe that teenager who just hit puberty and suddenly counts as full-sized. And don't assume that you're safer indoors. Let's say you're a scribe's assistant. Sounds better, right? Shady temple courtyard, gentle work, cool ink, clever jokes. No. It's hours of kneeling on stone floors, copying lines onto papyrus, with reeds that splinter in your fingers, surrounded by men who take their status way too seriously and eat onions like they're a personality trait. You're expected to write in perfect hieroglyphs, even though you've been squinting at faded text under bad light with a headache since before breakfast. If you make a mistake, you're scolded. If you correct it, you're arrogant. If you fall asleep, you're disrespectful. And if you complain, well, don't. Just don't. Even potters, who at least get to sit while working, aren't safe. You shape clay in the heat, your hands coated in a film of sticky mud and blood from the cuts you got hauling water to soften it. You breathe in dust until your lungs wheeze like worn-out bellows. The kiln burns nearby, throwing out waves of heat that turn your skin red before the clay even hardens. Fishermen? They work before dawn, casting nets in water that hides leeches, snakes, crocodiles, and the ever-present possibility of drowning under a capsized reed canoe. They're soaked before the sun rises and stinking of fish by the time it does. Their hands are shredded. Their skin never dries. Their pay? A few half-rotted tilapia, and the thrill of not being eaten today. If you're a stone cutter, congratulations. You've won the ear-shattering, lung-blackening lottery. You squat inside narrow shafts, chipping at rock with bronze tools that haven't been properly sharpened since your grandfather last offered a goat to the gods. You inhale powdered limestone for hours. You wipe your face with a rag that used to be part of someone's funeral wrap. You carry chunks of rock on your shoulders and pretend the popping sounds in your spine are character building. There's no water down there, no breeze, no exits. You emerge caked in grey, coughing, blinking at the light like a blind rat emerging from a tomb. Sometimes you pass out. Sometimes you don't wake up. But the work goes on. Always. And when something breaks, your ankle, your back, your spirit, what happens? You visit the healer, not the doctor. That word doesn't exist for you. There are temple healers, yes, but they're for the wealthy or the dying. For the rest of you, there's the village wise person, which is shorthand for someone with a collection of herbs and absolutely no bedside manner. They give you a poultice, a paste of honey, mud, onion juice, and maybe a crushed beetle for extra confidence. They tie it to your wound with a strip of linen that might have been part of a curtain once. Then they pray, sometimes loudly, sometimes with their eyes closed and their hands in the air like they're trying to summon a better outcome through volume alone. If you're bleeding, they cauterize it with a hot stick. If you're infected, they drain it with a dull blade. If you cry, they tell you it pleases the gods. Not that it helps, it just pleases them. No one talks about mental fatigue, emotional exhaustion. That feeling behind your eyes like the sun has moved inside your skull and is slowly setting behind your forehead. You're not allowed to be tired of being tired. You're not allowed to say, I can't do this. Because you have to. Because survival here isn't a right, it's an unpaid internship in misery. So instead of therapy, you mutter to yourself while pounding grain. Instead of journaling, you talk to the river. Instead of rest, you lie flat on the floor and stare at the ceiling until your body forgets how to care. And through it all, you're still hungry. Constantly. Your rations are not generous. Bread, if there's flour. Beer, if there's mash. Onions, because they grow in anything and count as both vegetable and deodorant. Occasionally you get lentils. Even more occasionally, a bit of dried fish or meat from an animal that died of natural causes, which usually means nobody saw what happened. Most days, your meals are an act of compromise. You eat pottage, again, a gloppy bowl of yesterday's leftovers boiled with today's regrets. It tastes like sadness and survival. You add herbs when you have them. Salt, if you're rich. Spices? Please. Spices are for people whose houses have pillars. There's never enough, not just food, never enough rest, never enough shade, never enough comfort, just barely enough air to keep going. And what makes it worse is that you know it doesn't end. There's no reward coming, no vacation, no clean break. The best case scenario is that you keep doing this until your knees give out, your eyes fail, and someone younger takes your place. And when you finally collapse for real, when your body finally says no, in a way no one can ignore, they bury you in a shallow grave, whisper a prayer, and reassign your tools before the sun sets. Because the work still isn't done, eventually the exhaustion stops being sharp. It becomes background noise. Not a scream, not even a moan, just a dull hum behind your eyes, like a swarm of insects you've learned to ignore. Your hands don't hurt anymore. They just are. Your back doesn't throb. It settles into a permanent curve, into a shape that says, this person has seen too many harvests and not enough sunsets. You start to forget what rest feels like. Not sleep. You get that in fits and fragments, when the heat and insects allow it. No, rest. The kind that isn't broken by obligation. The kind that doesn't involve sleeping next to a coughing uncle and 3 goats that don't understand personal boundaries. But it's not just your body. The work carves into your mind. You forget how to daydream. There's no mental space left. Your imagination has been replaced by task lists. How many bricks left to lay? How many weeds in the grain plot? How many lashes the overseer gave out last week? And whether he'll swing wider today? You stop asking why. Why is there never enough food? Why does the pharaoh need another monument? Why do we drag stones under a sun that could boil fish in a clay pot? These aren't questions you get to ask. And even if you did, the answers would not be kind or useful. Instead, you frame your questions differently. Not, why am I doing this? But, will the wind blow today? Will the overseer be distracted? Will the beer taste less sour tonight? And when things get hard, really hard, you don't reach for change. You reach for ritual. You pray. Not because you think it will change anything, but because it gives shape to your despair. You mumble the old hymns to Ptah, to Thoth, to Hathor. You kiss the amulet hanging from your neck, not because it's magic, but because it's yours. Something solid, something small that listens. You believe in fragments, in moments, sometimes in silence, other times loudly, desperately, in front of an idol shaped like a falcon, your voice cracking from thirst and fear. You say things like, Ra, spare me the sun today. Osiris, let this pain mean something. Anubis, if I die hauling bricks, don't let me wake up in the wrong tomb. You light incense when you can afford it. You mark the new moon with a scratched line on the wall. You watch the temple priest walk by in linen so white it mocks you, and you wonder, is faith a ladder or just another chore? The priest tells you suffering is holy, that labour purifies the soul, that to serve the Pharaoh is to serve Ma'at, the divine balance of the world. And you nod, because what else is there to do? You try to believe him, because if he's wrong, then your entire life has been a long, slow, pointless march into heat stroke and obscurity. So you believe in balance, even when your part of it feels like the heavier side of the scale. You believe in the afterlife too, sometimes, when you're not too tired, when you're not curled in a corner picking at your own bug bites, when you're not standing knee-deep in water praying the crocodile doesn't notice you. In those moments, you imagine the field of reeds, a paradise, a perfect mirror of earth, except without the pain. A place where the Nile runs cool and gentle, where you lie in the shade of fig trees, sipping beer that never goes sour, where the work is easy, the food is plentiful, and no one yells. But even paradise has rules. You must be buried properly. You must be weighed. You must recite the negative confession before Osiris. I did not steal. I did not kill. I did not work lazily. That last one always gets a smirk. No one works lazily. They just break slowly. You wonder if the gods know what labour does to the soul, if they've ever carried a brick for hours with a cracked tooth and bleeding hands, if they've ever stood in line for bread and got told to come back tomorrow, if they've ever pretended to be grateful for a half shade under a tree full of biting ants. You doubt it, but you never say that out loud. The gods have ears and tempers. So instead, you keep moving, because motion is your only luxury, your only rebellion. You drag your hoe through dirt so dry it cracks into flakes. You lift jars heavier than your sense of purpose. You kneel. You sweep. You bend. You repeat. And when someone new joins the work crew, young, strong, hopeful, you don't envy them. You just nod. You've seen it before. They'll be proud for a while. They'll think they're different, but the sun doesn't care, and neither do the stones. You remember being that new person, not fondly, but you remember. That version of you had smoother hands and louder questions. That version thought labour was temporary, that things would get better, that effort would be noticed. That version is gone now, buried somewhere between the third flood and the day your back first refused to straighten. And yet, you keep going. You teach your child how to plant onions without snapping the roots. You show your sister how to balance a water jar so her neck won't ache by noon. You help your cousin fix the wheel on the grain cart, again, even though it's barely worth saving. Not because you believe in progress, but because it's what's done. Because survival in ancient Egypt is never loud, never proud. It's quiet, repetitive, performed in sweat and silence, under a sun that doesn't care and gods that might. And somehow, even under all of this, people still sing. Low, rhythmic work songs. Call and response. Whispered verses about fish and figs and lovers who left without saying goodbye. They sing while pulling ropes, while grinding grain, while scraping walls clean for paint that won't last the season. It doesn't make the work lighter, but it gives it shape. And in a world built of heat, dust, labour and silence, sometimes shape is enough. Let's start with the obvious. You're not a pharaoh. In fact, you're so far from being pharaoh that you're not even close enough to see one. You might live your entire life without so much as catching a glimpse of the royal golden headdress in the distance. The closest you get to royalty is hearing about their divine bowel movements through second-hand gossip from someone whose cousin once polished a palace step. You're not a noble. You're not a priest. You're not even a merchant. You are, at best, a peasant. Which sounds charming until you realise it just means everyone is allowed to ignore you unless they need something heavy carried or something inconvenient blamed on a person with no legal recourse. The class structure of ancient Egypt is shaped like a pyramid, which feels poetic until you realise what that actually means. Wide base, tiny top. Most of society is crammed into the bottom layers, sunburned and unpaid, while a shimmering few at the top sip-date wine and commission paintings of themselves being adored by gods with falcon heads. Let's meet the cast. At the very top, the pharaoh. He is not just a king. He is a god on earth, which is an excellent job title if you can get it. He owns everything: land, livestock, labour, even your breath. If you're born poor and die early, which you will, he doesn't know. If your roof caves in during a storm, he isn't told. If your child survives the pox, he doesn't send a note. But if you skip work on festival day, if you whisper something cynical near the temple gates, if you forget to bow low enough near a statue, then suddenly someone remembers you exist. His word is law. His face is on the coins. His tomb is already being constructed before he even hits puberty. And when he dies, he gets an afterlife mansion, 30 jars of preserved organs, and a fleet of stone servants carved just to protect him in death. You'll be lucky if someone doesn't reuse your grave in 5 years because space is tight. Below him, the priests and nobles. These are the landowners, temple administrators, and generally overfed interpreters of divine will. They write laws, collect taxes, lead ceremonies, and remind everyone else that they're doing the real work, spiritual work, while you're out bleeding into a grain sack under 110-degree sunlight. They wear fine linen, real white linen, not the sun-yellowed sheet hanging from your clothesline. They smell like oils and incense. You smell like onions and faint regret. Their homes have multiple rooms with floors. Not dirt, actual stone or tile floors. Sometimes even painted ceilings. You once walked past a noble's home and saw a servant fanning him while he sat motionless on a cushion. Not sleeping. Not reading. Just being fanned. You thought about that for 3 days. These are the people who decide whether your labour was adequate, whether your offerings were sufficient, whether your existence is a tax liability or a source of usable sweat. They don't do labour, they do oversight, which is just a polite word for standing nearby with a stick. Beneath them, the scribes and officials, the educated class. These are the people who can read, write, and make lists of other people's grain supplies. They live in shaded quarters near temples or offices. They document every transaction, every prayer, every incident involving someone falling off a cart after questioning temple fees. Scribes are smug. And why wouldn't they be? They get to sit while working. They don't haul rocks or chase goats. They don't break fingernails digging irrigation trenches. Their tools don't weigh 30 pounds. They weigh ounces, styluses, ink pots, sheets of papyrus, and yet they wield more power than the man carrying bricks by the dozen, because they control records. And records in Egypt are how the gods keep score. Your entire life, in theory, can be reduced to a few brush strokes on a scroll you'll never see. And if that scribe decides to write lazy or disrespectful next to your name, you'll be punished before you even get the chance to deny it. One wrong entry, and suddenly you're banned from the granary for a week. And no one asks questions because paperwork doesn't lie. Only scribes do. Now we descend to the middle class. And yes, that's a concept, sort of. These are your craftsmen, traders, stonemasons, boat builders, and more rarely, independent farmers. Sounds promising, right? They're technically not peasants, but technically is doing a lot of work here. These are the people who live slightly better and die slightly slower. They have specialised skills, which means they're tolerated, but not admired, not protected. The potter's child still sweeps floors. The weaver still coughs up dust at night. The boat builder still gets paid in grain and beer, and the hope that this flood season won't erase half the docks again. They get called citizens. But if a noble's ox breaks its leg in your workshop, you're still the one getting blamed for divine disrespect. And finally, we reach you. You are the bottom layer, the foundation stone of this entire social monument. A labourer, a servant, a tenant farmer, a herdsman, a carrier, a dig site crawler, a nobody. Your job is to survive visibly enough that people remember to yell at you, but quietly enough that no one accuses you of thinking you're important. Your name is rarely recorded. Your family isn't traced. Your labour is constant, but your status is temporary and disposable. And there are levels within this lowest level. Are you free? Technically? Can you leave? Only if you want to starve somewhere else. Are you a tenant farmer? That's a fancy way of saying you work the land someone else owns and they take the food. Are you a herdsman? Great. You smell like goats for life. Are you a tomb labourer? Congrats. You'll spend your living years carving glory into someone else's afterlife. And if you're enslaved, a prisoner of war, a criminal, or someone born into a status that never lets you forget it, then your rights are even fewer. You're not paid, you're permitted. Permitted to breathe. Permitted to live indoors. Permitted to not be beaten today. The law doesn't protect you. It references you. As a statistic. As a reminder. As someone else's property. You're listed between cattle and grain allotment. And yet, and this is the part that really stings, you're expected to be grateful. Grateful for your ration of beer. Grateful for your single torn tunic. Grateful that the Nile flooded only a little too much this year. Grateful that the whip cracked near you, not on you. grateful for a job that isn't digging the latrine trench or hauling incense jars for a priest who insists everything smells off. You've heard of the Book of the Dead, the sacred spells and rituals designed to guide a soul into the afterlife. You've never read it. You can't read, but you've seen the illustrations. Grand processions, golden sarcophagi, feathers being weighed against the heart. You wonder if there's a version for you. A book of the sweaty, a book of the blistered, a book of I did my best with what I had and only cried 3 times a week. But no, your life doesn't get songs. Your suffering doesn't get scrolls. Your loyalty doesn't earn you a statue. You are born, bent and buried under a system that doesn't even have the decency to pretend it sees you. And yet, somehow, you still show up. Because that's the trick of the hierarchy. It's not held up by gold, it's held up by you. You don't need anyone to tell you where you sit in society. Your status is stitched into your clothes, carved into your calluses, and reflected in how people look at you. Or don't. Ancient Egypt doesn't do subtle. It doesn't whisper class into your ear. It screams it from every pillar, every gate, every pair of sandals you'll never afford. Start with your body. You're darker than you used to be. Not just from the sun, though that certainly helps. No, your skin has taken on the hue of outside. That distinct, toasted brown tone that only comes from years of standing in direct sunlight while nobles rest beneath canopies. You don't tan. You burn, peel, heal, and do it again. Your hands give you away instantly. They're thick with calluses, rough with papyrus cuts, dotted with scars from tools no one sharpened properly. You could slap a brick wall and leave an imprint. You could shake a priest's hand and draw blood, assuming you were ever allowed to. Nobles' hands are pale, smooth, delicate like eggshells and twice as fragile. Their fingernails are clean. Yours are dirt, not dirty. Dirt, as in composed of it. You once tried to scrub your nails clean before a harvest festival. You gave up. Now you call the lines natural hieroglyphs and pretend it's religious. Then there's clothing. You own 1 tunic, maybe 2, if someone recently died and bequeathed you their wardrobe, which consisted of another identical tunic with slightly fewer rat bites. It's linen, technically, but it's the kind of linen that's seen enough washings, sun fades, sweat stains, and structural compromises to now qualify as a suggestion of fabric. It doesn't hang, it clings. Damp, gritty, and always slightly crooked, because the one tie string broke last winter, and you've been improvising ever since. And colours? You don't get colours. Colour is for people who never cook, never clean, never sweat through their armpits before sunrise. The nobles wear indigo, red ochre, sometimes even dyed silks from foreign traders. You wear dust and sun-bleach surrender. Jewellery. Maybe a bead necklace someone dropped 3 festivals ago. You wear it like an heirloom, because it is. A found, chipped heirloom made of clay and hope. And don't think you're fooling anyone. Even your smell gives you away. The rich anoint themselves with oils. Myrrh, frankincense, lotus blossom, cinnamon bark. Their skin gleams. Their presence wafts. If a noble woman walks past, the air remembers her for hours. You smell like onions, stale beer, dust, and whatever your feet stepped in during yesterday's goat panic. You do bathe when the stars align, but the result is less refreshing and more slightly less offensive. You've tried perfuming yourself with crushed mint. It lasted 30 seconds and attracted bees. Posture is political too. You don't stand up straight. Not because you don't want to, you physically can't. Years of bending, hauling, crouching, and hunching have locked your spine into a shape somewhere between worn-out archer and disappointed question mark. You walk differently than the rich. They glide, you shuffle. They look ahead, you look down. Not metaphorically, literally. Because making eye contact with someone of a higher class without invitation, that's disrespect. Punishable by fine, flogging, or a memorable public scolding you'll replay in your head for the next 6 years. Speaking of eyes, did you know your gaze has a hierarchy? If you're speaking to someone above you, you're supposed to lower your eyes. Not because the sun is in them, because you are not. Your social station demands it. You don't look at a noble, you glance, sideways, briefly, like someone noticing a cloud that might be important. If you hold a gaze too long, they'll say you're defiant, or possessed, or thinking something above your station. And don't even think about speaking first. Conversation follows rank. The higher ranked person speaks. The lower ranked person replies, usually with, "Yes, my lord," "Of course, mistress," or "I live to serve," which is both accurate and depressing. Your vocabulary is also different. Nobles speak in metaphors and formal idioms. As Ra rises in the east, as sure as the sacred ibis returns. You speak in grunts, weather observations, and whatever curse your grandfather invented while trying to repair a fishing net in 110-degree heat. Even laughter has class. The rich laugh with restraint, a soft, curated chuckle, usually while sipping wine or politely dismissing someone's suffering. You laugh by accident. It escapes. It wheezes. It sounds like someone slapping a wet papyrus scroll against a rock. You've laughed mid-cough, mid-sneeze, mid-sob. Food? Oh, food screams status. The rich eat in bowls, fired clay or even metal, sometimes gilded. It sometimes with legs. You eat from a chipped pot your cousin broke, and you glued back together with goat hair and prayer. You sit on the floor. They recline on cushions. You eat with your fingers. They use spoons, knives, occasionally a servant's hands if they're feeling dramatic. Their food smells like honey, lamb, saffron, roasted garlic, and pepper brought from far-off lands. Yours smells like boiled lentils, fermented onions, and that one vegetable you can't identify, but it grows near your latrine and you're trying not to think about it. You never dine with them. That's not how this works. You serve, you clean. You get to smell their feast and then eat your own half-burnt barley cake in the corner with a cracked cup of lukewarm beer and a beetle that refuses to leave. Even funerals humiliate you. When nobles die, they're embalmed with reverence, painted in gold, wrapped in fine linen, their names etched in tombs built with geometry, prophecy, and seasonal labour you probably contributed to. You see the priests singing. You see the offerings piled high. You hear the chants. When you die, there's a hole, a shallow one, maybe a bundle of reeds for a coffin, maybe just the mat you slept on, now repurposed for your grand finale. Your name isn't written. Your story isn't carved. Your memory, if it survives, will live inside one sentence. Remember the one who always smelled like garlic and fell into the canal? The humiliation doesn't end with death. It peaks there. Because even in the afterlife, your role is conditional. You have to earn it. With spells you can't afford. With rituals you'll never receive. With offerings that no one will make in your name. You dream of a tomb. Not a big one, just something with a roof. something that says this person existed. But dreams are for people who aren't still working when the sky turns red and the wind smells like punishment. In ancient Egypt, humiliation isn't just something that happens to you. It's something that gets scheduled. It is formal, it is public, and it is expected. Humiliation is ritualized in how you enter a space. A noble's house. You bow before stepping over the threshold. Not because you're polite, because it's required. You remove your sandals, if you have any. You speak only when spoken to. You never sit unless invited, and that invitation almost never comes. You wait, always, at the door, at the gate, in the heat. Because entering a place you're not entitled to is an offence. You stand in your humility. You sweat in your lower status. And sometimes, after waiting for hours, someone will appear just to tell you the master is unavailable, and you may now walk back home with dignity trailing behind you like a dead rat. You're not even allowed to own the kind of dignity nobles take for granted. They get titles. You get categories. You're not named in records unless you're being taxed, punished, or conscripted. Your birth wasn't recorded. Your death won't be. And your name only exists in the mouths of people who need something carried or blame assigned. Even greetings reinforce your place. A noble approaches. You kneel. A priest passes by. You bow. A temple official stares too long. You drop your gaze and hope they're not feeling interpretive today. You've heard of people being punished for walking too confidently, for standing upright in a street meant for higher-ranking traffic, for refusing to move fast enough out of the way of a chariot owned by someone's cousin's cousin who once worked at the palace granary. Your body is trained into humility. Even how you carry things matters. When you carry water or grain or bricks, you bow your head, not from the weight, but because it's better to look servile. You've learned that standing tall makes people uncomfortable. It invites scrutiny. It gets you told things like, mind your posture. You walk like you think you're important. You're not important. That's been made clear. But what's worse? Sometimes you start to believe it. You catch yourself apologising for taking up space, for eating loudly, for blocking the sun too long when passing someone of higher status. You whisper thank yous when someone doesn't hit you. You say excuse me when you bleed on their tools. And sometimes they let you perform their superiority, like during festivals. At the feast of Opet, nobles parade through the city in litters. The poor follow on foot, singing, clapping, cheering for a prosperity that never touches them. You chant praises for a pharaoh who doesn't know you exist. You throw petals at the feet of someone who wouldn't step aside for you if your house was on fire. This isn't called cruelty, it's called order. The scribes write about it with pride. The priests preach it as divine will. The nobles enforce it with ceremony. Even your neighbours expect it. Because questioning the system isn't just dangerous, it's unthinkable. It would be like blaming gravity for falling. You don't dream of rising above. You dream of falling slightly less hard. And yet, your humiliation is expected to be graceful, quiet. You can suffer, but you cannot make noise about it. You can break down, but only in private. You can cry, but wipe your face before the overseer rounds the corner. No one wants to see a worker feeling things, and if you protest, if you raise your voice or stop moving, you're corrected. Sometimes it's a warning. Sometimes it's a beating. Sometimes it's removal from the ration list. Your existence is so fragile that one wrong word can separate you from bread, water, or shelter. Not forever. Just long enough to hurt. Just long enough to remind you that your position in society is not inherent. It's permitted. There are formal punishments, of course. Stocks, floggings, public shaming. These aren't for criminals. They're for people who forgot where they belong. There's the penalty of dusting, when you're forced to sweep the roads with a palm frond while the rich walk past you, laughing. There's palm lashing. 10 hard strikes across your back. Not for a crime, but for disrespect. There's ritual degradation. Being made to bow before an idol. Not in worship, but in punishment, because your failure was a spiritual imbalance. And then there's silence. The worst punishment. When you're ignored. Not spoken to, not acknowledged. Just left outside the system. Forgotten like broken pottery buried in the courtyard. You live in a world where the acknowledgement of your suffering is a luxury, and somehow you still find ways to cope. You make jokes. Quietly with other workers. You name your blisters. You hold naming ceremonies for new calluses. You form bonds over shared beatings. You make fun of nobles behind their backs and reenact their pompous walk when no one's looking. And it helps. Briefly. It lets you reclaim a piece of your own story in a system determined to write you out. Because that's the final truth. Even humiliation, when repeated enough, becomes a kind of culture. You pass it down. You teach your children how to kneel properly, how to bow without shaking, how to carry grain without looking confident, how to accept that their names might never be carved in stone, but at least their hands will stay busy. And one day, when you're old, and someone younger sighs under the weight of another cruel instruction, you'll say, lower your eyes, breathe slowly. Don't let them see your thoughts. Because this is Egypt, and your dignity lives in the part of you they forgot to take. You've seen the statues. You've heard the hymns. You know the names. Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, Thoth, Anubis, Sekhmet, Bastet. The gods are everywhere in Egypt, on walls, in songs, in your food bowl, etched into the tools you use, the stars you sleep under, the diseases you fear. They are the fabric that covers your daily life. Not soft fabric, though. Something rough, coarse, sun-stiffened. Something you can't escape, but also can't afford to question. Because belief isn't optional. It's cultural oxygen. And it's being used to keep you exactly where you are. From the day you're born, you are told, you are part of Ma'at, the divine order. Ma'at is balance, harmony, the truth of all things. It's why the Nile floods, why the crops grow, why the sky doesn't fall. But Ma'at also means obedience. And if you stray from it, if you doubt the rituals, question your place, or roll your eyes when the priest chants another 2-hour praise song, then you are chaos, Isfet, disorder, and chaos must be punished. Not by men, by the gods. You are told that Ra sails his sunboat across the sky each day and into the underworld each night, where he fights a demon serpent named Apophis. If Ra fails, the sun won't rise. If you don't do your part, pay your taxes, work your quota, attend the feast, chant the names, then Ra might fail because of you. Yes, you. So you better keep singing. Temples reinforce this idea daily, not just with chants, but with architecture. You enter through massive gates that dwarf you on purpose. The ceilings are so high, they make you feel insect-sized. The halls are lined with gods staring down like supervisors you didn't ask for. And in the centre, surrounded by incense, gold, and silence, is a statue. Silent, cold, unblinking. You never touch it. Only priests do. And they tell you what it wants. Because only they can read the signs, interpret the dreams, feel the omens. They tell you when it's time to pray, when it's time to fast, when to plant, harvest, burn, and bury. They know when the gods are pleased and when they are angry, which is inconveniently often. Every natural inconvenience is interpreted through divine guilt. A dry season? The people have sinned. A flood that drowns half the village? Someone dishonoured their ancestors. Cattle disease? The gods are testing your humility. Toothache? Spiritual imbalance? Possibly demons. Definitely your fault. The priest offers purification for a price. Not in coin, but in offerings. Bread, beer, chickens, a favour, labour, loyalty. You pay, always. Because not paying means misfortune. And not just for you. For everyone around you. It's communal guilt, which means the village watches you closely. If the rain doesn't come, and they remember you skipping the morning chant, expect glares, maybe stones, maybe worse. Belief is not private here, it's public infrastructure. And it's not just religion, it's politics. The pharaoh is not merely a king. He is the living Horus, the falcon-headed god of rulership, descended through bloodlines and crowned by divine right. He is part man, part god, part administrative headache. When he speaks, it becomes law. When he breathes, it's a miracle. When he dies, he ascends to Osiris and joins the pantheon. You don't vote, you don't petition, you obey, even if he asks for monuments taller than your grain silo, even if he demands taxes during a drought, even if he changes the calendar, the priesthood, or the name of a city. You comply, because not complying is against the will of the gods, and defying the gods is not civil disobedience, it's treason, with cosmic consequences. Even entertainment serves this control. There are festivals, yes, parades, music, food, drinking, but always with a sacred framing. The said festival celebrates the pharaoh's rejuvenation, his divine fitness to rule. The feast of Opet links the ruler to the god Amun. The beautiful festival of the valley honours the dead, and reminds you to fear what happens if they're not properly honoured. Every gathering reinforces the same themes. Your ruler is divine. Your place is ordained. Your suffering has purpose, even if that purpose is just keeping things exactly as they are. You've heard songs since you could walk. Praise Ra for the light he gives. Praise Osiris for the death he watches. Praise Mayat for the order we serve. Praise the Pharaoh, whose will is eternal. Praise the bread, the beer, the Nile, the toil. Praise. Praise becomes reflex. You don't believe because you've thought about it. You believe because not believing has no infrastructure, no scaffolding, no ritual, no approval. So you keep showing up. You bow when the priest raises his arms. You clap when the temple dancers finish. You nod when someone says, the gods are good, even if your stomach is empty and your father hasn't come back from the labour camps. And in the quiet moments, when you're alone, sweaty, aching, you don't curse the gods. You curse yourself, because the system has trained you to internalise failure. You didn't suffer because the ruler is greedy. You suffered because you didn't pray hard enough, didn't offer enough, didn't believe with the right kind of sincerity. The gods don't fail, you do. And so, with the dust on your feet and the salt on your brow, you turn to the sky and whisper, Ra, forgive me. I'm still learning how to serve. You don't just believe in the gods, you live in them. Every action, every breath, every awkward conversation in the street is quietly soaked in a sacred logic that wraps around your life like the linen around a mummy. Tight, suffocating, irreversible. Start with birth. When a child is born, the first words whispered aren't welcome, they're prayers. To Taweret, the hippo goddess of childbirth, who guards the womb with teeth and rage. To Bes, the dwarf god who dances off evil spirits. The midwife doesn't just cut the cord, she chants, splashes holy water, draws protective sigils in ash. Because babies aren't just vulnerable to infection, they're vulnerable to spirits, malicious winds, wandering souls, jealous neighbours. If the baby cries, it's blessed. If it doesn't, you light incense, fast for a day, and hope the gods are merely testing you again. Then comes education. Not reading and writing for most, because that luxury is reserved for the elite. But every child, no matter how poor, is taught the sacred basics. How to pray before eating. How to kneel facing east at dawn. How to walk past a shrine without speaking, unless the gods are listening. How to identify divine animals, and more importantly, how not to upset them. Cats are sacred. Beetles are sacred. Ibis birds, crocodiles, baboons. If you so much as raise your hand to one, you're not just cruel, you're criminal. You've offended Thoth, or Sobek, or Bastet herself. You may be cursed, your family may be cursed, your harvest may rot, your house may collapse during flood season, and someone will say, well, you shouldn't have kicked that scarab. Children learn that morality isn't a choice, it's a cosmic exchange. Be good, and the gods protect. Slip up, and they notice. You learn that your thoughts matter, not just your actions. The gods weigh your intentions, which means your mind is always under surveillance. You may smile and work hard, but if your heart holds envy, doubt, or disobedience, they see it, they record it. This isn't superstition, it's cultural design. And when you get sick, which you do often, the gods are consulted before the healer. Let's say your stomach aches. You haven't eaten well in days, the river smells weird, and there's a colony of something nesting in your grain jar. But that's not the explanation. The explanation is, you offended Sekhmet. Maybe you walked past her shrine without bowing. Maybe you thought something irreverent while peeling onions. So the healer comes. He looks into your eyes. He chants. He burns herbs, makes paste from honey and crushed locust wing. He ties a protective amulet to your wrist with twine. Then he whispers, next time, bring an offering. Even death is orchestrated by belief. You don't just die in Egypt, you transition. Your body must be treated. Not for sanitary reasons, but for spiritual travel. It must be washed with natron, dried, wrapped in specific numbers of linen layers, blessed, anointed, inscribed. If the embalming is done poorly, if your family can't afford enough linen, can't hire the right priest, can't provide the proper funerary texts, then your soul gets lost, wanders, hungers, cries out from the edge of the field of reeds and is never heard again, unless someone remembers to light a candle for you every month, unless they say your name, unless they place a bowl of beer beside your tomb every festival, and if they forget, then you die again, this time permanently. Because in Egypt, memory is immortality, and forgetting is the worst punishment of all. You've seen families go bankrupt trying to pay for burial rites, selling goats, pawning tools, borrowing grain just to afford the right kind of priest, the right kind of box. You've heard wails at the edge of cemeteries, not from grief, but from fear that the burial wasn't good enough, and the dead will be angry. Even dreams aren't safe. Dreams are monitored, interpreted. A dream of snakes? Divine warning. A dream of flying? Spiritual promotion? A dream of the Nile overflowing its banks? You might want to visit the temple? Soon? You wake from nightmares and check your body for signs. Was it just the lentils? Or a message from Osiris? Better burn incense, just in case. The culture doesn't allow blank space. Every silence is filled with ritual. Every confusion is filled with symbolism. Every coincidence is filed under cosmic message. You can't just stub your toe and yell. You must ask yourself, did I offend Hathor? Was this a sign? Did I forget to feed the family altar? And the answer is always yes, because something, somewhere, always needs pleasing. Even architecture is belief. Every house faces east, if possible. Every door is blessed. Every lintel painted or marked. You step over thresholds with intention, never dragging your feet. You sweep clockwise. You build shrines in corners, place idols in high places, and never ever sleep with your feet pointing toward a tomb. Your furniture is symbolic. Your kitchen is sacred. Your roof, where you sleep during hot nights, is technically a celestial platform where the stars can witness your dreams. You're never off the grid, not spiritually, not culturally, not mentally. The gods don't drop in, they live here, and so do you. So you learn to fold your doubts into polite silence, to say the words even when you don't believe them, to light the incense even when you're out of offerings, to smile when the priest says the gods are pleased, even if your crops failed and your child coughs blood. Because maybe, if you do all that, next season will be better. Or at least, not worse. Eventually the voices of the priests aren't just heard in the temples, they echo inside you. The songs, the prayers, the warnings. They stop being outside instructions. They settle behind your eyes, fold into your breathing, embed themselves into the rhythm of your thoughts like a second heartbeat. You're not just told to be obedient. You begin to feel that obedience is what makes you real. You don't need guards watching you. You've internalized them. You hear their voices when you step on the wrong side of a shrine, when you eat before praying, when you think, even think, that maybe it shouldn't be this way. You silence yourself before the gods ever need to. That's the genius of the system. It doesn't just control through fear, it controls through meaning. It convinces you that the pain is sacred, that your hunger is righteous, that your sweat is a form of offering. And if you stop hurting, if things ease, even briefly, you wonder if something's wrong, if you're being tested, because you've been trained to see suffering as moral. A well-fed man must be greedy. A rested man must be lazy. A rich man, chosen by the gods. A poor man, being refined by divine fire. This logic protects the system and breaks you quietly. You stop asking for justice. You ask for patience. You stop praying for change. You pray for strength to endure the same. In this world, humility isn't just a virtue, it's survival. You never call attention to your pain. You minimize it. You frame it as growth. You speak of your burden as a gift, because to say otherwise is to accuse the gods of cruelty. And that's not just unwise, it's unthinkable. So you say, I'm being shaped. I'm learning discipline. The gods are strengthening me, even as your back folds into a question mark, and your hope dries up like figs in the sun. And it's not just you who believes it. Your neighbours do too. They see your struggle and nod solemnly, like suffering is a weather pattern, like it's just something that happens sometimes, not to be resisted, just endured. They remind you that Ma'at, the cosmic balance, must be preserved, that too much ease invites chaos, and chaos in this world is not just a mess, it's a spiritual infection. So you lean into your burden, you decorate it, you make it yours. Somehow you begin to feel pride in how much you can take. Your identity is no longer separate from your oppression, it's built on it. You define yourself by your endurance, by how little you complain, by how gracefully you submit. You hear of pharaohs being buried with entire ships, with gold masks, with chests of offerings and jars of organs and full wardrobes for the afterlife, and you don't resent it. You admire it, because it means the gods care about him, and maybe, if you bow deeply enough, if you serve quietly enough, you'll be born closer to that glory next time. Because yes, you believe in reincarnation. You believe that souls return, that a humble farmer today might be a royal scribe tomorrow, that the gods reward the faithful, that your next life is being written by the posture of this one. So when your stomach growls, when your legs shake, when your boss spits words at you like curses, you smile, a small, cracked, exhausted smile, and say to yourself, next time it will be better. You imagine being born as someone with sandals that aren't falling apart, as someone with a real roof, as someone who doesn't have to fake reverence. Because in that life, maybe reverence comes easily. Maybe your body isn't always at war with itself. Maybe the gods smile before you even pray. And in the meantime, you keep your head down. You learn the appropriate proverbs. You repeat them like spells. Order is strength. To speak less is to be wise. The gods test those they love. You teach them to your children. Not because you want to, but because you're afraid not to. If they question, if they rebel, if they demand something better, what will happen to them? To you? To the village? So you train them early to bow, to whisper, to avoid eye contact, to love the gods more than themselves. And that is how belief becomes inheritance. A quiet generational contract, signed with obedience, sealed with sweat, and passed from one sunburnt hand to another. But even in this mental cage, people find strange kinds of light. A mother sings lullabies to her child, using the names of gods as rhythms. A farmer paints tiny symbols on the inside of his grain jar to bless his harvest, even though no one will ever see them. A potter shapes little clay figurines of Bastet, leaving them at the edge of town for no one in particular. You don't expect reward, you just hope to be seen, not by men, by something higher, something that watches the bowed head, the blistered palm, the whisper of a prayer mumbled between mouthfuls of sour beer. Because in this system, belief is resistance. It's the only way to matter, the only way to be remembered, the only way to tell the gods, and yourself, that you're still here, still faithful, still breathing, still trying. You may have endured the heat. You may have bowed before every statue, prayed to every god, and accepted your place at the bottom of society's neatly stacked pyramid. But now you face the part no one sings hymns about, the rot, the filth, the things that move when they shouldn't. Because ancient Egypt, for all its divine symmetry and celestial order, is also a feast of horrors served 3 times a day, sometimes with lentils. Let's begin with the basics. Insects. Not the nice kind. Not bees pollinating flowers or butterflies dancing through the reeds. No, you live with flies. All the time, everywhere. They are your roommates, your judges, your tiny winged tormentors. They do not respect privacy. They do not sleep. They do not leave when you ask nicely. They crawl into your ears. They drink your sweat. They land on your eyelids just to remind you that you don't matter. If you swat them, they return, angrier. If you ignore them, They lay eggs in your lentil stew. There are hieroglyphs praising pharaohs, and there are hieroglyphs for swarms of flies. That's how constant they were, canonized. You once saw a child fall asleep with their mouth open and wake up with 3 flies still inside it. Then there are mosquitoes. You don't get bitten, you get drained. You wake up itching from head to toe, your skin a battlefield of tiny welts. You scratch until you bleed, and then you keep scratching. And then the wound gets infected. And then someone tells you it's because you didn't wash before sundown. Next, parasites. Let's talk about your drinking water. You fetch it from the Nile. You hope it's clean. You see the floating debris. You see the bird droppings, the reeds, the occasional carcass drifting past. You drink anyway, because there's no choice. Boiling water is an option if you have wood, but wood is precious, scarce, needed for cooking, heating, building. So you skip it. You drink the river. You say a small prayer and hope the gods are merciful. They're not. The worms arrive quietly. They curl up in your gut like they own the place. Some make you nauseous. Some steal your nutrients. Some emerge from your body, uninvited, sometimes through your feet, slowly, writhing, like a sacred punishment with no moral. There is a name for this. The guinea worm. And when it reveals itself, you're not healed. You're told to tie it to a stick and gently pull it out over several days. Welcome to medicine. And then, of course, there are the diseases you don't see. Your neighbour coughs once, then doesn't get up again. Your aunt's eyes turn yellow, and she forgets her own name before the week is over. Your cousin's leg turns black after a scratch from a rusted tool, and by sunset, you're planning his burial. None of this is surprising. Life expectancy is low. Children die more often than they survive. You don't expect to reach 40. You hope to reach 30. Your friends talk about mortality like it's weather. Looks like pestilence today. Better eat the bread before it goes bad. Let's pause to discuss that bread. It is not soft. It is not fresh. It is not even entirely edible. Because of sand. Yes, sand is in everything. You sweep it out of your bedding. You cough it into your soup. And you chew it unknowingly with every bite of food. You bake bread with flour ground on stone slabs, which means tiny bits of granite get into the mix. You eat it. Over time, it files down your teeth. Slowly, quietly, painfully. Your molars become blunt. Your gums recede. Your jaw throbs when you chew. You get infections, abscesses. Some days, you feel a tooth wiggling and pretend you don't. Because if it comes out, you'll be bleeding for hours, and there is no dentist. Just a neighbour with a sharpened stick and a strong stomach. You dream of eating soft food, boiled vegetables, stew with meat, anything that doesn't scream back when you bite it. But you eat what you have. Barley cakes, onions, leeks, lentils, and beer. Always beer. Which brings us to digestion. You are, in a word, not okay. Your stomach is a war zone. Between the worms, the mould, the grit and the stress, your digestive system barely functions. You swing between diarrhea and constipation with no middle ground. Sometimes you're running for the edge of the village. Other times you haven't gone in 4 days, and you're considering making an offering to Thoth just for relief. And then there's work. Hard labour in 100+ degree heat. No shade, no breaks unless someone dies. Maybe not even then. You carry stones the size of small gods. You lift baskets filled with river mud. You push sledges across sand while your skin cooks like unseasoned fish. There is no sunscreen, there is no water cooler, there is only sweat and yelling, and if you collapse, you're moved, like furniture. they assume you'll wake up eventually. If you don't, they assume it was your time. You don't get a day off. You don't get hazard pay. You get blamed for your own heat stroke. Should have paced yourself. Should have worn a better tunic. Should have sacrificed more barley to the gods last week. You start to see the absurdity in all of it. You pray for health, then drink filth. You build homes for nobles while yours collapses. You praise a god of protection while picking worms out of your foot with a burnt reed. And still, they say this is the golden age. You wonder, golden for whom? Because from where you're standing, barefoot, blistered, bleeding, it looks a lot more like the gods forgot something. There comes a point where you stop being surprised. You see a goat fall into the canal, get carried downstream, and pop up again 2 days later, looking smug and slightly cleaner. You watch your neighbour get bitten by a snake, hiding under a rock he stepped on every morning for 8 years. You hear about a woman who sneezed during a funeral ritual and was accused of summoning a curse. And somehow none of this surprises you. Because ancient Egypt is not just hot. It's strange. It's theatrical. It's a stage play written by gods with too much free time. Let's talk about animals. Crocodiles live in the same river you bathe in. They sun themselves on the same banks where children chase frogs. And once in a while, they remind everyone that they're sacred, yes, but also terrifying. You hear the stories. A boy dives in after a fish and doesn't come back. A reed cutter turns to rinse his face and loses his hand. A merchant's goat vanishes mid-bleat. There's even a priest in your district who claims to have a pet crocodile, wears a necklace of its teeth, feeds it scraps behind the temple. You don't know whether to be impressed or worried, probably both. Then there are scorpions. Tiny, silent, neurotic little monsters that hide in your sandals and wait. You learn to shake out your shoes every morning, and even then, you still flinch as you slide your foot in. You've seen what happens when someone gets stung. The sweating, the swelling, the stuttering prayers as their vision turns yellow. If they survive, it's a miracle. If they don't, well, that's what the gods wanted, apparently. And if it's not the sting that gets you, it's the fever that follows. And if not the fever, the infection. And if not the infection, maybe you'll just be lucky and lose feeling in your leg for a few months. Then there are heat hallucinations. Yes, real ones. Because when you spend 8 hours under a sun that doesn't blink, with no shade, little water, and more work than sleep, your brain begins to do things. You see people who aren't there. You hear your mother calling you from the fields, except she's been dead for 2 seasons. You start having entire conversations with birds. Once, you swore the Nile whispered your name, lovingly, persuasively, like it wanted you to come closer. You didn't. You hope that was the right decision. Some workers talk about seeing the gods, not metaphorically, literally. One man swore he saw Ra himself, in a blazing human form, hovering just above the granary. Another claimed Hathor kissed his forehead and promised better weather. A woman once danced for 3 hours straight in the market square, saying Bastet had entered her spine and told her to sing until the flies went blind. No one stopped her. They just watched. Because who are you to interrupt divine confusion? But not every hallucination is charming. Some are terrifying. You see black figures in your periphery that vanish when you turn. You smell burning even though nothing's on fire. You hear sobbing and discover it's your own voice. Except you weren't aware you were crying. You stop trusting your senses. You start trusting ritual, because logic fails you. But ritual is dependable. You wave incense at a cough. You chant at a fever. You scratch protective symbols into your door with a broken comb and hope no one notices. Then there are the burial errors. You don't talk about them out loud, but they happen. A body goes unwrapped. A name is misspelled on the tomb. Someone forgets to include the Book of the Dead passages. One time, you swear they buried a left shoe instead of a heart scarab, and that means doom, because a body improperly prepared might rise angry, or worse, wander lost forever in Duat, the underworld, weeping, forgotten, half soul, half shadow. You've heard priests try to fix it with emergency rituals, late-night offerings, chants performed backward under moonlight. You've even heard of bodies being dug up and reburied correctly after family dreamt 3 nights in a row of blood dripping from their rafters. And what about disease no one understands? People swell for no reason, eyes cloud over, tongues turn black. A child's skin peels like bark, and everyone just calls it divine judgment. There's no diagnosis, no treatment, just speculation. Maybe it was a cursed object. Maybe she spoke disrespectfully to a cat. Maybe he stared at the moon during an eclipse. Maybe it's contagious. Then the family is quarantined, not by medicine, by fear. They're moved to the edge of the village. No one brings food. No one speaks their name. They disappear, not just physically, but from memory. That's another horror. Being unremembered. In a culture where your afterlife depends on memory, being forgotten is worse than death. So when things get too strange, too messy, too unexplained, people don't lean in. They look away. Because attention might invite the same fate. Because curiosity, here, is dangerous. You start to learn which questions are safe. Is the beer sour today? Has the Nile receded? Will the priest perform the goat sacrifice before or after the sun reaches the pillar? And which questions are not? What happened to the coughing man from last week? Why did that shrine collapse? Why are the birds flying inland so early this year? You don't ask those, you just bow and keep walking. By now nothing alarms you. You've seen too much, heard too much, smelled too much. The shock has faded. The body has adapted. What once made you gag now just makes you sigh. What once made you pray now just makes you scratch your head and say, figures. Like the man whose feet turned black after stepping in a puddle no one had noticed before. He limped for days, then stopped coming to work. You ask where he went. Someone muttered, Ra took him early. No one asked follow-up questions. Or the woman who coughed blood into her cooking pot, wiped it out with her tunic, and kept stirring. Because food is food, and there's no time for whatever that was. You hear screaming sometimes. Not fear, just routine pain. A scorpion sting, a shattered tooth, a collapsed cart. Someone's hand caught in a grinding stone. People react like it's thunder. Annoying, but not unusual. Horror here doesn't arrive like a surprise. It settles. Like dust. Like sand between your toes. Like the hum of flies you've stopped noticing. You pass a man today whose eyes are completely white. He doesn't blink. He stares at the sun and mumbles to no one. He's covered in red blotches, his fingernails missing, his breath like mildew and metal. You nod politely and walk past. You're not cruel. You're just tired. There is no room left for wonder. You've used it all on survival. Even death, the final dramatic act in most civilizations, feels casual here. Unremarkable. Expected. People die while working. While eating. while relieving themselves behind a bush. And when they do, someone checks their pulse, shrugs, and says, "Well, that's one less mouth for the grain count." There are days you forget who died last week, or the week before that. You only remember the smell, a kind of sour, citrus sick scent that clings to your nose even after the body's gone. You remember the buzz of flies gathering at the body before the priest could. And funerals? Not all get them. Not anymore. If your family can't pay the rites, you're wrapped quickly and buried shallow. No gold, no amulets, no songs, just silence and a few annoyed grunts from workers already behind schedule. Sometimes graves cave in. Sometimes jackals dig them up. Sometimes you see a femur sticking out of the sand and hope no one you know is attached. You look away. You always look away. Even the animals reflect this grotesque balance of sacred and disturbing. The cat is holy, sure, but also feral, covered in sores, missing a tail. It hisses at you from the market and pees in your grain bag. And what can you do? You bow. Because if you strike it, if you even raise your hand, someone will gasp and whisper, "That man wants to be cursed." You've seen people apologise to animals. You've done it yourself. A beetle lands on your shoulder and you say, "Pardon me, divine one," and gently brush it away. A snake slithers through your bedding. You whisper a prayer and wait for it to leave. A baboon steals your only pair. You bow and hope the gods liked the offering. There is no dividing line here between superstition and common sense. It's all one endless blend of ritual and survival. You can't afford to separate them. Your skin itches constantly. From bites, from heat, from nerves, from linen that never fully dries. You get used to it. You scratch until you bleed, then scratch more. You tell yourself, maybe this is part of the body's purification. Maybe itching is the soul trying to leave through the pores. You once heard a priest say, pain is the soul asking for attention. You nodded. It made sense at the time. It still does. Because what other explanation is there for any of this? Why the water stinks in the morning? Why the rats don't fear you anymore? Why your neighbour swears he saw a man pull his own tooth out, cook it, and eat it for strength? Why you saw a chicken with 2 beaks? Why the moon sometimes pulses like a heartbeat? Why your body hums when the heat hits 112? And the most absurd part, you're still here. You still wake up every morning. Still wrap your tunic. Still bow to the gods. Still drag your tools across sunburnt sand and squint into a future that doesn't feel like it includes you. You've seen people go mad. Not suddenly, but slowly, quietly. They start humming the wrong chants, digging holes for no reason, talking to shadows that never leave. No one stops them. No one knows how. And you? You start to understand them. You start to think. Maybe madness is just another form of adaptation. Maybe the only sane reaction to this world is to crack, just a little. Smile too long. Laugh too much. Treat every curse like a compliment and every scar like scripture. You look at the sky. It hasn't rained in 2 months. You smile and say, "Blessed clarity." Your cousin dies of stomach worms. You call it spiritual cleansing. You pass a man vomiting blood. You offer him a fig and say, "The gods are reminding you you're mortal." He laughs. You both laugh. It's not funny. It never was. But you laugh anyway, because the only alternative is screaming. And no one has time for screaming. It starts quietly, not with an event, not with a collapse, with a delay. You stand up one morning and don't immediately know why. You dress, but it feels like dressing someone else. Your hands move, but they feel borrowed. You stare at the clay cup in your hands, full of tepid beer and bits of grit, and ask yourself, was this always the taste? You walk to work, or wherever the day is supposed to go. Your feet find the path. Your body follows. But your mind, it lingers. On what? You're not sure. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't question. It just pauses. And in that pause, something drips out. Not blood, not sweat. Just a kind of being. It's not dramatic. You still function. You tie the cords. You lift the bricks. You nod at the overseer's barked commands. You help an old man find shade. You carry the child who stepped on a thorn. You still exist. Everyone sees you. But the you that existed before? The one that hoped, and the one that thought about the next harvest or the next festival? He's not here. You forget what day it is. Not in the normal calendar doesn't matter way, but in the deeper way, the I didn't know days had names kind of way. Time flattens, moments blur, everything becomes a repeat. The sun rises, you sweat, you eat, you pray, you sleep, you sweat again. You stop reacting to things. Someone cuts their hand on a chisel. Blood everywhere. You glance at it, hand them a rag, and move on. Someone collapses in the heat. You shade their face with your shadow until they stir. Then you keep walking. It's not cruelty. It's economy. There's only so much of you left to spend. You no longer hate the overseer. You no longer admire the priest. You no longer fear the gods. Not because you've risen above, but because you've sunk too far down to reach any of it. You remember hearing a story once, a parable maybe, of a worker who dug so long in the sun that he forgot his own name. Everyone laughed. But now, you wonder, maybe that was peace. Because names mean expectations, roles, attachments. If you don't remember who you are, then maybe you don't have to try so hard to be that person. You once had dreams. You remember that. You wanted to become a scribe. Not because of power. Just to sit in the shade. To write. To make symbols mean things. To be heard, even if just on papyrus. Now, you couldn't trace a cartouche if someone drew it on your own chest, and you don't care. That's the real sign. Not the forgetting, but the comfort in forgetting. The slow, soft pleasure of not trying. You hear others talk about taxes, about the weather, about which god favours which festival this season. You nod. You participate. But inside, you feel like a guest in your own skull. Like someone's renting out your awareness and not paying rent. You lie down at night and stare at the ceiling. It has cracks. The same cracks as always. You've named them before once for fun. Now they're just cracks. The breeze doesn't come tonight. Your skin itches. You're too tired to scratch. You close your eyes. You're not sad. You're not hopeful. You're not anything. You're simply here. You start to notice that you're watching your life from just behind your eyes. Not from inside your heart, not from your bones. Just from behind. Like you're perched inside your own skull, looking through the window of your face, wondering if the person steering this body even remembers where it was trying to go. You speak. You answer when someone calls your name. But the voice doesn't sound like yours anymore. It's functional, dry, empty of warmth, or irritation, or meaning. You laugh when others laugh, but only because it's easier than explaining that you no longer understand the joke, or why anyone would find anything funny when your feet are cracked open and your cousin's gone missing, and the priest says the heat is a lesson. You wonder if anyone else feels this. And the terrifying part is, maybe they do. Maybe they all do. Maybe everyone is just pretending that they still care, so that no one else gets scared enough to admit that they don't either. You begin to envy the truly devout, the ones who still believe every cough is a message from Sekhmet, the ones who cry during the moon prayers, the ones who chant with such reverence that you can't tell if they're in pain or in love. You don't resent them. You just feel like someone watching a play in a language they forgot. You remember being that way once, caring, yearning, looking up at the stars and actually hoping someone was listening. Now you look up and think, still there, still silent, still burning. You hear about a man who walked into the desert and didn't come back. They say he was cursed, or called, or just wandered. You think about that more than you should. Not because you want to do it, but because the idea of leaving everything behind, the sun, the sweat, the schedules, the sounds, and just fading into the dust, there's something peaceful about that. Not dramatic, not tragic, just peace. No gods to please, no bricks to lift, no insects humming at your ear, no skin peeling from the inside, just wind and space and the slow collapse of the self, uninterrupted. But you don't do it, you stay. Because even now, at the bottom of your mind, there's a tiny rusted mechanism still ticking. It doesn't speak, it doesn't scream, it just ticks. A compulsion, a routine, an unwillingness to leave the task undone. It says, eat something, sweep the corner. Don't forget to bow as you pass the temple. Smile when the child offers you a fig. Not because you believe, but because you're still alive. You start to become two people. The one who performs the duties, and the one who watches. And you're not sure which one is more real. Sometimes you catch yourself staring into a bowl of water, not to drink, not to wash, just staring. Your reflection is warped, sun-blasted, eyes dull, shoulders slumped like wet fabric. And in that moment you think, is this it? Is this what I became? A shadow that moves when told. A vessel for commands and calluses. A quiet, obedient ghost that hasn't died yet. You remember your mother years ago, before the fever took her. She used to sing while kneading dough. A little song about the moon's silver laughter. She'd tap your nose and say, "You'll sing this to your children." You can't remember the tune, only the words. And only because they feel like they belong to someone else. You imagine holding a child now, your own or anyone's, and trying to sing. And all that comes out is a whisper. Flat, cracked, off-key. You wonder if that's a metaphor. Maybe the human voice, when not used for joy, forgets how to carry it. Your body aches. But that's background noise now. More memory than sensation. What you feel instead is something deeper. Not fatigue, but depletion. A spiritual dryness. Like your soul has been left in the sun too long and is starting to flake away. You dream sometimes. Not of escape, not of paradise, but of things being slightly less heat, less work, less noise, less expectation. You don't dream of pyramids or rivers or gods. You dream of quiet rooms, of food that doesn't crunch when it shouldn't, of a breeze that doesn't bring dust. You wake up and stare at the wall, and for a second, just a second, you forget where you are, and it's beautiful. Then the memory returns. The heat, the body, the life, the rules, the chants outside, the smell of burning goat hair, the child crying next door, the grain you still need to rinse before the sun climbs too high, and all of it drops back onto your shoulders like wet sand. You breathe, you rise, you start again. Not because it makes sense, but because stopping has no clear shape. Eventually, even hope begins to feel like a burden. too bright, too sharp, too alive for the world you wake up in, you stop reaching for it, not out of bitterness, just practicality. You realise that hope asks too many questions. Could things get better? Should you be doing more? Is there a future beyond this? Questions require energy. Energy requires belief. And belief, you ran out of that weeks ago. You begin to speak less. You answer only what's asked. You stop offering opinions. Not because you don't have them, but because explaining them takes effort. And you've learned to conserve effort the way others conserve grain. You no longer correct people when they say your name wrong. You don't argue when someone blames you for a mistake you didn't make. You smile when someone lies to your face, not out of forgiveness, but because you no longer expect honesty to matter. What matters is keeping things quiet. Noise is for people with something left to lose. You don't want noise anymore. You want shade, and silence, and instructions that don't change. You measure your days in tasks, not time. Fill the jar, sweep the step, wrap the cloth, close the eyes. It doesn't matter whose eyes, or why they're closing. Everything becomes repeatable. And in a strange way, that's comforting. Predictable pain is better than unpredictable kindness. Because kindness hurts more now. It stings. When someone asks how you're doing with real concern, it stirs something inside you. Something soft and unguarded. And it makes you want to cry. But crying takes energy. So you thank them, nod, walk away. You've forgotten what it feels like to be fully present in your own body. Your legs move, your arms lift, your spine obeys. But it all feels like borrowed motion. Like your real self is hovering 3 steps behind, quietly watching, not sure whether it wants to rejoin. You have good days sometimes, not happy, just less bad. Days where the heat is bearable, where your bowels behave, where no one yells at you, where the dust stays low and the sun is just a little tired. You almost feel normal. But that's a trick too. Because normal doesn't mean joy. It just means pain you've already adapted to. You think of your own funeral sometimes. Not with dread, not with drama, just curiosity. Who would show up? Would they remember to offer bread and beer? Would they place a charm on your tongue so your soul could speak in the afterlife? Or would they forget? Would you be one of the ones buried quickly with no inscription, no farewell? You imagine it with strange neutrality. Maybe being forgotten wouldn't be so bad. You're already halfway there. You used to have stories about yourself, little narratives you carried around to explain your life. I'm the strong one. I'm the one who gets things done. I'm the one who's always helping others. I'm the one who still believes. But those stories faded. No one asked for them anymore. No one listened when you tried to share. Now you don't tell yourself anything. You just are. A person-shaped rhythm. A vessel for movement and meals and fading breath. And when you see others faltering, you don't rush to help. Not because you don't care, but because you know how much pretending it takes to say, you'll be okay. You can't lie like that anymore. You've learned the truth. Most people aren't okay. They're just quiet about it. And so are you. That's the final collapse. Not death, not despair, but silence, complete, voluntary, undeniable, the kind that doesn't need to be noticed to be real. And in that silence, in that numb, desert-bleached stillness, something peculiar begins to take shape. Not hope, not joy, but acceptance. You are here, still breathing, still moving, still enduring. Not for glory, not for reward, Not even because you want to, but because this is what your body does. Because survival has momentum. Because quitting takes more energy than continuing. Because even when the gods stop answering, the sun still rises. And maybe that's enough. Maybe this, whatever this is what living looks like when all the beautiful illusions fall away. A quiet persistence, a heartbeat in the sand, a breath you didn't ask for, but take anyway. You're still here. And for now, that's all. The sun hangs heavy. The sand no longer moves. Even the flies are quiet now. Your breath slows. Your thoughts dissolve like limestone in the river. The gods do not speak. The heat does not lift. But you're still here, somewhere between sweat and memory, somewhere behind your eyes. And slowly, everything fades. The noise, the effort, the name you once carried, gone. Only silence remains, and sleep, and dust. Good night.